In continuation with one of my previous video where I discussed regarding the structure of human digestive system, in this video we'll talk about the process of digestion. As you all know, digestion is a process where the complex food that we ingest into the buccal cavity is broken down into simpler soluble form, and whatever the undigested and insoluble waste is thrown out of the body in the form of feces. So definition of the digestion looks simple, isn't it? Though the definition looks simple, the process of digestion is complex. There are many kind of mechanical process and chemical process takes place from mouth to anus during the process of digestion, which will break down the complex food into simpler soluble form. So whatever the complex food that we take, it may be rice, chapati, paratha, or sometime it may be a junk food, it should have to have a nutrients, and these nutrients are mainly classified into six categories, that is proteins, carbohydrate, lipids, minerals, vitamins and water. So though the many kind of junk food that we take lack nutrients, but the food that we take should have to have these six basic nutrients. Out of these nutrients, carbohydrate, proteins and lipids are categorized as macronutrients, and minerals and vitamins are categorized as a micronutrients. So whenever we talk about the digestion of the food particle, we mainly talk about the digestion of the macronutrients, that is digestion of carbohydrate, proteins and the lipid. So in this video, we'll talk about how carbohydrate, proteins and lipids get digested and it is converted into simpler form, because whenever we take these macronutrient, that is carbohydrate, proteins and fats, it will be in the complex form, and these complex macronutrients need to be converted into simpler soluble form. We'll see how exactly these complex macronutrients is converted into simpler soluble form in different parts of the digestive system. So first we'll talk about the carbohydrate. As you all know, most of the food that we take have large quantity of carbohydrate. It may be rice, dosa, chapati, paratha, everything have large quantity of carbohydrate. So whatever the diet we take, it has 80% of the carbohydrate, and the carbohydrate is in the form of a complex polysaccharide. Usually starch is present in the whatever the food that we take. We'll see how this complex polysaccharide like starch is converted into simpler form, that is monosaccharides. We'll see how the carbohydrate get digested in mouth. So digestion process should always start with the mouth or the buccal cavity, because we ingest the complex food into the buccal cavity. So obviously digestion of food starts with the buccal cavity or the oral cavity. As I discussed in the previous video, the buccal cavity or the oral cavity have lots of teeth, tongue and the salivary gland. So we have three pairs of salivary gland, that is parotid gland, sublingual gland and submandibular or submaxillary gland. And these three pairs of salivary gland secrete saliva into the buccal cavity, and this saliva plays a very important role in the digestion of the food particle, because saliva consisting of many kinds of electrolytes like sodium, potassium, chlorine, bicarbonate, etc. Apart from that, saliva also consisting of enzyme like salivary amylase and lysozyme. Salivary amylase, as the name indicates, amylase is a hydrolytic enzyme which splits the carbohydrate. Hydrolytic means it splits something. What it splits? It splits the complex carbohydrate. So salivary amylase acts on the carbohydrate, or it helps in the digestion of a carbohydrate. Whereas the lysozyme, it's not a lytic enzyme or it is not hydrolytic enzyme. Instead, it acts as antibacterial agent which prevents the infection, because through the food many infectious agent can enter our body, and these microorganisms are tackled or taken care by the enzyme, that is lysozyme, which act as an antibacterial agent. So salivary amylase is an enzyme which play a very important role in the digestion of carbohydrate in the mouth. So if you talk about the digestion of carbohydrate in mouth, and it is done with the help of enzyme, that is salivary amylase. So salivary amylase act on the starch and it converts starch into maltose, which is a disaccharide. So here polysaccharide starch is converted into disaccharide, that is maltose, with the help of salivary amylase enzyme at pH 6.8, and pH 6.8 is maintained by the saliva in the oral cavity or buccal cavity. So that is about the digestion of of carbohydrate in mouth. So once the digestion of carbohydrate takes place in the mouth for about 3 to 4 minutes, because in the mouth the food remains only of about 2 to 3 minutes. After that, the food enters the pharynx upon swallowing or deglutition, and from the pharynx the food enters the esophagus, which is a long muscular tube, and upon the series of contraction of the walls of the esophagus, which is known as peristalsis movement. So because of the peristalsis movement, the food passes through the esophagus and it passes down and it enters the stomach. Now we'll see what happens in the stomach, or how the digestion of carbohydrate takes place in the stomach. As I discussed in the previous video, in the stomach the mucus layer gives rise to numerous gastric glands. So the inner lining, that is mucus layer of the stomach, gives rise to numerous gastric glands, and these gastric glands mainly consisting of three types of cell, that is mucus neck cell. As the name indicates, this mucus neck cells produces mucus. One more type of cell is peptic cell or the chief cells. These peptic cell or the chief cells produces an enzyme known as pepsinogen. So pepsinogen is in the inactive form. It's a proenzyme which is in the form of inactive. So pepsinogen is produced by peptic cells or the chief cell. One more type of cell is parietal cell or the oxyntic cell, which produces hydrochloric acid. Yes, hydrochloric acid is produced by the parietal cells or the oxyntic cell. And one more thing is intrinsic factor. So parietal cells also produces a factor known as intrinsic factor, which helps in the absorption of a vitamin B12. So these are the three types of cell that is present in the gastric gland of the stomach, which produces acidic gastric juice. So gastric gland produces gastric juice, and it is called acidic because of the presence of hydrochloric acid, which is an acid. So because of that, we call that as a acidic gastric juice, and acidic gastric juice is produced in the stomach. So once the food enters the stomach, because of the muscular movement of the walls of the stomach, food thoroughly got mixed with the acidic gastric juice to form a chyme. So chyme is nothing but the content of the stomach. So upon mixing of the food with the acidic gastric juice, the content is called as chyme. Okay. So upon mixing of the food with this acidic gastric juice, the digestion process begins in the stomach. Okay. So if you talk about the digestion of carbohydrate in stomach, there is no digestion of carbohydrate because of the acidic condition of the stomach. There is no digestion of the carbohydrate in the stomach. Anyhow, digestion of protein and fat takes place in the stomach, but not carbohydrate. So carbohydrate digestion takes place in the mouth and it is paused in the stomach. So upon entry of food into the stomach, the digestion of carbohydrate is paused in the stomach. Later, the food is stayed for about 4 to 5 years in the stomach, and digestion of all the food particles like proteins, fats and all takes place in the stomach. After 4 to 5 years, the food, that is chyme, enters the intestine. As I already discussed in the previous video, small intestine consisting of mainly three parts, that is duodenum, jejunum and the ileum. And most of the digestion takes place in the duodenum part of the small intestine. So upon entry of chyme, that is content of the stomach, into the small intestine, it got mixed with the pancreatic juice, bile juice and the intestinal juice. So food thoroughly mixes with all these juice. So first we'll see what are the content that is present in this juice which helps in the digestion of the food. First we'll see the content of the pancreatic juice. Pancreatic juice, as the name indicates, it's produced by the pancreas and it consisting of lots of inactive enzymes like trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, procarboxypeptidase, amylases, lipases and the nucleases. So in that, trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen and procarboxypeptidases helps in the digestion of protein. Amylases, as the name indicates, it helps in the digestion of carbohydrate. Lipases helps in the digestion of lipids, and nucleases helps in the digestion of nucleic acid. but these enzymes are in the inactive form. So these need to be activated. How it will be activated? Mainly this trypsinogen enzyme is activated by the another enzyme that is produced by the intestinal juice known as enterokinase. So enterokinase is an enzyme that is produced by the intestinal juice, and this enterokinase acts on the trypsinogen and convert this trypsinogen into its active form, that is trypsin. So enterokinase act on the trypsinogen and it converts trypsinogen into active form, that is trypsin. Later this trypsin activate the all other inactive enzyme of the pancreatic juice. That is how the all enzyme, that is inactive enzyme, got activated in the pancreatic juice. So that is about the content of pancreatic juice, which helps in the digestion of different content of the food. Next, if we talk about the bile juice, as you all know, bile juice is secreted by the hepatocytes or the liver cell, and later it is stored and concentrated in the gallbladder. So if we talk about the content of the bile juice, it consisting of mainly bile pigment, that is bilirubin and biliverdin, which are the coloring, so pigments. Okay, bilirubin and biliverdin. Apart from that, it also consisting of bile salts, cholesterol and phospholipids. But bile juice lack enzyme, or there is no enzyme in the bile juice. Then what is the function of bile juice? Yes, bile juice helps in the digestion of fat, and it digests the fat by emulsification. So there is a process called as emulsification of fat, during which fats are broken down into smaller particle known as micelles, and that is done with the help of content of the bile juice. Apart from that, these bile juice also activate lipases, which helps in the digestion of lipids. So that is about the content of the bile juice. Third one is intestinal juice, which is also known as succus entericus, and it is produced by the mucus layer of the intestine. So mucus layer of the small intestine gives rise to goblet cells and the brush border cells. These goblet cells produces mucus, and even the content of the brush border cells along with the mucus that is produced by the goblet cells produces succus entericus or the intestinal juice. And this intestinal juice also consisting of varieties of enzymes like disaccharidases. As the name indicates, disaccharides means it helps in the digestion of disaccharides. Dipeptidases means it helps in the digestion of dipeptides, that is protein. Lipases, which helps in the digestion of lipids. Nucleosidases, which helps in the digestion of nucleic acid, that is nucleosides. So these are the enzyme that is present in the succus entericus or the intestinal juice. So that is about the content of pancreatic juice, bile juice and succus entericus, which consisting of different types of enzyme that helps in the digestion of food in the duodenum part of the small intestine. Now we'll see how the carbohydrate digestion takes place in the duodenum, that is intestine part. So once the food, that is chyme, enter the duodenum, if the starch is present in that food, then it is acted upon by pancreatic amylase. Yes, pancreatic juice consisting of amylase, isn't it? So starch acted upon by pancreatic amylase and convert it into simpler form, that is disaccharides. And you know that succus entericus, that is intestinal juice, consisting of disaccharidases like maltase, lactase and the sucrase. So this disaccharidases act on disaccharides like maltose, lactose and sucrose and convert them into monosaccharide. For example, maltose acted upon by the enzyme, that is maltase, which is disaccharidases, and convert it into glucose and glucose, which is a simple monosaccharide. Similarly, lactose acted upon by lactase and convert it into glucose and galactose. Sucrose acted upon by sucrase and convert it to glucose and fructose. So all these monosaccharides are the simpler soluble form which are directly absorbed into the bloodstream. So that is how complex polysaccharide, that is starch, is converted into simpler soluble form, that is monosaccharide, and the digestion of this takes place in mouth and the intestine, not in the stomach. So that is about the digestion of a carbohydrate. Next we will talk about the digestion of a protein. So always digestion starts in the mouth. So if we talk about the digestion of protein in the mouth, there is no digestion of protein because there is no proteolytic enzyme in the mouth. As I already discussed, mouth or the saliva has only salivary amylase which helps in the digestion of carbohydrate. No proteolytic enzyme. That's why there is no digestion of protein in the mouth. So if we talk about the digestion of protein in the stomach, when the food is present in the stomach, the proteins are acted upon by the pepsin. As I already told, pepsin is produced by peptic cells or the chief cells of the gastric gland, but it is produced in the inactive form, that is pepsinogen. So when the pepsinogen comes in contact with the hydrochloric acid, that is HCl, produced by the parietal cell or the axontic cell, it gets activated and it converts into active form known as pepsin. Understood? So pepsinogen, when it comes in contact with the hydrochloric acid, it converts into its active form, that is pepsin. At the pH 1.8, and acidic pH is because of the presence of hydrochloric acid, which is produced by the parietal cell or axontic cell. So this active form, that is pepsin, acts on the protein that is present in the food and it converts it into simpler form, that is proteoses, peptones and the polypeptides. And you know that proteoses, peptones and the polypeptide later acted upon by the different enzyme in the intestine. So once the food entered the duodenum part of the small intestine, these proteoses, peptones and the polypeptide, which is a simpler form of the protein, acted upon by the trypsin, chymotrypsin and the carboxypeptidase, that is the enzymes of the pancreatic juice, and it convert them into dipeptide. So pancreatic juice consisting of trypsin, chymotrypsin and procarboxypeptidase, which are the proteolytic enzyme which act on the proteoses, peptones and the polypeptide and convert them into simpler form, that is dipeptide. And you know that succus entericus, that is intestinal juice consisting of dipeptidases, so which act on the dipeptide. So dipeptidase enzyme of the succus entericus acts on the dipeptide, that is end product of the previous reaction, and it converts dipeptides into amino acids. So amino acids are the very simple soluble form, and these amino acids are later absorbed by the mucosa layer of the small intestine. Okay, so that is how complex protein is converted into amino acid, that is simple soluble form in the stomach and the intestine. So there is no digestion of protein in the mouth, and in the stomach and the intestine it is acted upon by pepsin, and in the intestine it is acted upon by trypsin, chymotrypsin and carboxypeptidase, and finally by dipeptidases, and convert them into amino acid. That is about the digestion of protein in different parts of the alimentary canal. If we talk about the digestion of fats, there is no digestion of fat in the mouth region. Though in the mouth, that is along with the saliva, there is a production of lingual lipases by Ebner's gland. So mouth cavity or the oral cavity have a special gland known as Ebner's gland, which produces lingual lipases into the saliva. So lingual lipases is in the inactive form. That's why lingual lipase will not act on the fat in the mouth cavity. So though the lingual lipases is produced in the oral cavity along with the saliva, it is not acted on the fats because it is in the inactive form, and this lingual lipase is activated by the acidic condition of the stomach. So because of the presence of HCl, this lingual lipase is acted upon by the acidic condition of the stomach, and in the stomach this lingual lipase acts on the fats. Okay, so though lingual lipase is produced in the mouth, but it is produced in the inactive form. That's why there is no digestion of fat in the mouth. Okay, so if we talk about the digestion of fat in the mouth, there is no digestion of fat in the mouth. Then if we talk about the digestion of fat in the stomach, yes, there is a digestion of fat in the stomach, that is by lingual lipases, which is activated by the hydrochloric acid or the acidic content of the stomach, along with the gastric lipase. Gastric lipase is a lipase that is produced by the gastric gland. So gastric gland also produces small quantity of the lipase known as gastric lipase. So both lingual lipase and the gastric lipase acts on the fat and it converts it into diglycerides. So that is how digestion of fat takes place in the stomach, that is with the help of enzyme, that is lingual lipase and the gastric lipase. Later this diglycerides in the intestine. So both mono and diglycerides in the intestine acted upon by the lipases, that is both pancreatic lipase, that is lipase that is present in the pancreatic juice, and lipase that is present in the succus entericus. So both lipase acts on the di and monoglyceride and convert them into fatty acid and glycerol, which is a simple soluble form. So that is how fat gets digested, that is complex fat get digested and it convert into simpler form, that is fatty acid and glycerol. So finally in the intestine, that is specifically in the duodenum part of the intestine, all complex food particle is converted into simpler soluble form. Once the digestion is completed, the content from the duodenum enters the other part of the small intestine, that is jejunum and the ileum, where the absorption takes place. Absorption of what? Absorption of this soluble simple content of the nutrients. This simple soluble form of the nutrients got absorbed in the jejunum and the ileum part of the small intestine. So there is no digestive activity that takes place in the jejunum and the small intestine. Only absorption of the soluble nutrients takes place in the jejunum and the ileum part. And whatever the undigested insoluble waste is thrown out of the body. So waste from the jejunum enters the ileum, and from the ileum it enters the large intestine. As I already discussed in the previous video, large intestine also consisting of three parts, that is cecum, colon and the rectum. So waste from the ileum enters cecum through the ileocecal valve, which prevents the backflow of the waste from cecum to ileum. Later from the cecum, waste enters ascending colon, transverse colon and descending colon, then into a S-shaped structure known as sigmoid colon, and from the sigmoid colon, that is waste or the feces, enters the rectum, where it will be temporarily stored till defecation. Even in the large intestine, there is no digestive activity. So significant digestive activity is not present in the large intestine. Then what happens in the large intestine? In the large intestine, there is absorption of water, minerals and certain drug takes place, and even the large intestine produces mucus that helps in the attachment of this waste particle, that is feces, and it also helps in the lubrication of the feces throughout the large intestine. So that is how the complex food particle is converted into simpler soluble form, and how it gets absorbed, and how the waste is produced, and how it is thrown out of the body through the anus. So that is about the process of digestion in the human being. I hope this video is useful. If you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.